Hello, and in this video I want to talk a bit about the notion of actus reus. So essentially, in order to establish a crime, you need to show that the actus reus of the crime took place, i.e. the wrongful conduct, and you also need to show the mens rea, i.e. a guilty state of mind. Unless we're talking about, say, a strict liability offence, then of course you don't need to show the mens rea. However, unlike mens rea, where you can still get a criminal conviction without having a mens rea, i.e. looking at the strict liability offences, with actus reus we always need to have it. You can't have a crime, you can't have a thought crime, they always exist. So essentially I want to introduce the notion of actus reus in this video and talk about the general rule when looking at whether something classes as actus reus or not. So we can split the actus reus into three distinct forms. You have conduct crimes, consequence crimes, and circumstance crimes. Now, conduct crimes are basically where the actual conduct of a person is wrongful, so we prohibit that. For example, in motoring offences such as speeding, the actual going above the speed limit is wrongful, so all the prosecution have to do is show that you committed the act. However, this is different to if you look at consequences crime. Now, here what the wrongful element of the crime is the outcome of the act that was committed. So, for example, if we look at killing, it's the actual death that's caused that is wrongful. And this again is of importance because it means that prosecution has to show that the consequence actually took place, the harm took place. Unlike with conduct crimes, you don't have to show that speeding killed someone, you just have to show that speeding existed because that was what is wrong. With killing, it's the actual death of the person, which is what is wrongful. And the last type we have is circumstances crime. This is where the situation the defendant finds himself in is criminal. So, for example, in possession of drugs, say, or any kind of illegal weapon, that would be wrongful. The circumstances of you being, because you're not doing any such conduct. You might say it's conduct if you say that you're possessing it, that could be a conduct. You don't have to show that any harm has resulted, you just have to be in that situation. And these are really crucial when you're trying to prove that the defendant was guilty. The general rule for actus reus is that you can only be guilty for an act and not an omission. So what do we mean by acts and omission? Omissions are failures to take acts, whereas acts are actually physically doing something. And this rule is clearly portrayed in Airedale NHS Trust and Bland 1993. So essentially what happened in this case was there was a guy called Bland, Tony Bland I think it is, and he was involved in the Hillsborough 1989 crash, and he got crushed, and as a result he went into a permanent vegetative state. Now, basically the hospital gave treatment, but it reached a point where the treatment was not beneficial anymore, and essentially they decided, along with the parents and the loved ones, that it was time to withdraw the treatment and let him pass over. So they came to the court asking for consent. Now, this was actually really important because the courts had to say that if this was an act, then you would have death being caused, and therefore the hospital could be liable for murder or manslaughter. However, if it was an omission, there's no liability because we don't have any Good Samaritan laws like other countries do. That the example given is if you're walking and you see a child drowning in a swimming pool, you have no duty to save that child. You won't be liable if you just kept on walking ahead. So was this an act or was this an omission? And Lord Gough here, he discussed the difference between actively bringing about the death via lethal drug, and he said that would be a crime because that would be an act. You're actually killing someone, you're causing death. However, he said this is different because the hospital is withdrawing a treatment, thus establishing an omission. They're just taking it away. And you see the exception that I'm going to talk about in my other videos, that exception to this general rule is that there are 5 different types of duties. So statutory duty, contractual duty, duties in public office, voluntary assumption of responsibility, and special relationships. I'll talk about these ones individually in different videos. But if you have any one of these 5 duties, then you can be liable for omissions. And so when you look at the case of Airedale and Bland, they were saying, well, actually, the only duty the hospital has to Bland is that of providing beneficial treatment, and so long as the treatment is no longer beneficial, the hospital has no duty. Withdrawing the treatment is not actively causing death, it's just, it's taking away what it had provided that's no longer beneficial. This was an omission. The general rule here applies, and therefore the hospital was not liable. So that's in a sense what happened and how we can portray that. So as I discussed, the general rule, just to reiterate, is that cannot be liable for an omission, so a failure to act, unless you hold one of the 5 duties. But you are liable for acts, and we'll look at these different duties individually in each of my videos. Some of them will be short because they're very easy. For example, the contractual duty, they're pretty straightforward. Others are more difficult. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed. Thank you for watching.